So you said you looked at the links. Like, what kind of stood out to you, if I may
Um,
ask?
so like I was kind of intrigued by like the Human Ideals Facebook page,
Uh,
and just kind of going through that and seeing like what kind of activities have been going on and whatnot. And then I was also intrigued by the mission statement. That was kind of interesting to
mm,
think and ponder about. And then also like the like infinity symbol was interesting, and I was like, oh, okay. So these are
yeah.
three things that I was like, okay, this is like catching my interest. So I was like, something I've never heard of before, but I was kind of like, maybe there's more to it than what I'm reading at the surface level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a lot of like with this movement, even like from the imagery and whatnot, it is to convey like the overall purpose of the mission statement, and the symbolism is a part of that.
Yeah.
So what the plan here is, as more students hear about this, is that
Mhm.
when we go through the actual practices and stuff, like week by week, and then this is sort of an activism movement. So obviously um, it bleeds over into like social issues and the way we perceive them
Yeah.
based on our own spiritual practice, and that this mission statement is essentially, showing like how these two areas of spirituality and or politics, social issues, whatever you want to call it, how these two can mesh together, essentially.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And this would be categorized as a spirituality, not so much as a religion, right?
yeah, pretty much. Not like any sort of institutionalized religion. It is very, find your own path, and then the idea of it is for students to, if they can contribute their own experiences through this, they can uh essentially human ideals. It is a lot of, my own take on spirituality as well. It's like
Yeah.
it has a personal flavor to it,
Okay.
but then, as this movement grows, it's each student can add their own, perception of what the spiritual path is supposed to be about, and then the way they approach social issues based on that perception,
Mhm.
it's going to be very, highly varied from person to person, and then that'll be really interesting to see.
Ah, okay. So
Yeah.
there's like a lot of room for interpretation and growth in some ways, yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Cause I think, I was talking to like Dean Sony and Reverend Jim and whatnot. Um, we agreed on the fact that the last thing we want this to be is some sort of like set ideology, some
Yeah.
sort of like uh I don't know, like some fringe, like fringe radical movement, on campus, and then like, the what do you call it, like the administration and whatnot, they wouldn't want that either. So obviously, and the spiritual path is not meant to be ideological.
Right.
It is meant to be personal, and then you help each other based on those personal experiences, and then you go back. It's like people think of spirituality in terms of like, oh, it's either individually based, either you're totally alone and you're just, in it by yourself, or you're into this like group think, and it's none of that. That binary doesn't really exist. It's really a complement of one another.
Ah,
Yeah, yeah,
amazing. Well, I'm ready for your presentation. I
sure,
haven't got any responses, but if you're crunched for time, I'm definitely ready to get going if you'd like
sure,
me
yeah.
to.
We can get started here.
Yeah, let me mute.
Okay. You can keep your mic on, by the way, because if you want to ask questions like in between, yeah,
Yeah,
feel free to do so.
awesome.
Yeah. Just one thing, I think that like, if we get sort of this video, even if it is just the two of us, like today, like
Mhm.
if we can get this video out there, um, people can get an idea of uh what what this movement is about, and essentially, they'll have more questions, and then from then on, like originally, of course, the intent was, students would be on here and then they would ask questions in this presentation, but then if not, we could obviously do this and then branch out, do a sort of like a Q&A session, like later on, because they'll have questions from this and their own personal experiences, trying this out.
Yeah, I see you're recording it. So if you send me the recording, I can definitely forward it to the newsletter and have it
Sure. Yeah.
marketed that way.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. Okay, let's get started. All right. So, as you may know, this movement is called Human Ideals, and our motto, if you look at it, it's called "Love to Redeem the Darkness." And now that message is, it did take me a lot of time to craft it because originally, I did have a different motto, but uh, through this presentation, you'll kind of see the evolution of this idea of human ideals and why, why I've set up the motto the way that it is now. Right. So to start off, I want to do a little personal exercise for a moment. So the philosophy behind human ideals, a lot of it has to do with inspiration, right? Feeling your own, being in tune with your own personal journey in life, using your hardships to and make the most out of them, have a positive vision of existence, and use that to, address whatever personal or societal issues that you want to face and resolve. And for that, um, one exercise I really like to do is kind of center yourself into and then feel your true essence, right? Feel what you're inspired by deep down inside, right? So, what I want to do here is if you just close your eyes for a moment here. And then what this is it's sort of a visualization exercise. So now what I want you to do is think of something that you're inspired by, whether it's a social cause or, a movie, a character, a personal figure that you admire. So you visualize that. And then after you do that, think of the reason why you're inspired by, whatever you're visualizing. And what you want to do is notice the feeling that comes along with this image, a feeling of inspiration. And then as you get into that feeling, what you want to do is tie that back into your own personal life, whether it's, throughout your childhood, where has this feeling showed up and why has it showed up? And then you want to think of a time where this feeling has been stifled, whether it's through, negative experiences of life, through trauma or someone, uh, what someone said to you, something bad, some, bad comment someone made to you or whatever the case may be. Imagine a situation where that feeling has been stifled within your own life. Okay. Yeah. You can open your eyes now. So this exercise essentially ties back into our motto. So a question I want to present to you now is, even after that negative time, that time of desperation or trauma or whatever, did that feeling inside, your essence, did that die along with that situation, or did you still carry it with you? Was it still ignited within you?
I felt like it was still ignited within me. The to name the thing that stifled it was death,
Mm,
but I feel that with time and with reflection and the grieving process when that was coming to a complete, I was able to still find memories of that inspiration and even create my own memories of that inspired me so that I can move forward. And that's where
mm,
that's how I answer that question.
I see. So it seems like you're saying it's I don't know what you were inspired by, but in this case, what you were stifled by was the death of another person, not necessarily yourself, or because you do mention grief.
Yeah. So it was the death of a person that and that the period after that was very overwhelming with grief and
Mm,
distress, but uh, the inspiration that I was able to get from this person that I admired was not something that died with them. It continued to move on even after their death with me. So
I
yeah,
see. So you were inspired by this person.
yes,
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting. I never usually, but yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. To tell you the truth, I actually kind of wing that exercise because in terms of the overall theme, like to convey the message of if I go back to that slide, I call this your intimate. It's basically your true essence, your inner child, your soul, whatever
Mhm.
you want to call it. That place inside of you that's untouched. Like whatever happens in life, whether it goes your way, whether it doesn't go your way. That essence, that love that you have for yourself and for the world, it never dies, right? So through this process, what we're doing is this is just like a primer exercise, but through the more advanced practices from other teachers, um, within this, if you want to call it like a curriculum or like a program, um, there's very few exercises that I actually invented on my own. A lot of it is pulled from like many, many, many teachers. So it gives what it's designed to do is it gives students a broad overview of the field of spirituality and how nuanced it can be and sort of the debates and internal questions and disagreements that there are. And that shapes their personal experience of what that inner light is, that inner essence is. And then they become motivated by that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
Okay. So, if you saw in the email, one of the questions was, what is the root of all suffering, and what can we do to transcend it, which will come later. So, off the top of your head, because in your experience you mentioned grief, so would you say that grief and the death of people you love is, one of the main sources of suffering in life for everyone?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm,
Especially if that person like was a source of inspiration. In my case, then yes, that was a definitely a moment, a root of all suffering for me.
mhm. Well, would you sort of add on to that in terms of like not only death, but in maybe other situations that
Yeah,
could that could bring about similar emotions like grief, even if they're not dead.
yeah. I think something when I approached this question, one thing that immediately came to mind was evil. Um, and the abuse of power specifically as evil and how that causes suffering. And so I mean, a grief is a one of the emotions that could come up, but for me to ponder on like evil and abuse of power as a root was something that came to mind, um, that causes a lot of these after effect emotions.
Mm, I see. That kind of echoes onto like I don't know how heavily you are into politics, but let's say in like communist Russia or or whatever, people were lots and lots of people, or Nazi Germany were s- slaughtered mercilessly, and then you can feel a sort of grief for that, even if it is like long past.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, that just leads into one of the earliest depictions of human suffering. This is in Buddhism, 2,500 years ago, allegedly when his name was Siddhartha before he became the Buddha. If you may have heard of this story, what happened was that he was a very sheltered prince, but then one day, he became curious and stepped outside of his palace, and then he saw these four sights, which are old age, sickness, death, and then the renunciant, right? So this upper left corner, the ascetic, the renunciant, is what inspired him to take the path, because you didn't just see that, oh, life is just suffering, there's nothing you can do about it. There is something you can do about it. But then there is also this theme of sacrifice and renunciation, is that, no happiness comes free. You do have to exchange some pleasures for another. You can't have it all. You can't, one of the things he renounced was sensuality and like, you know, the pleasures of the palace life, good food, women and whatnot. He saw that in order to have a higher vision that he needed to forego some of these things. And there are some aspects of that renunciation in human ideals.
Mm.
Mm. And then I believe you're a Christian, right? If I recall correctly.
Yes.
Yeah, so you are probably really familiar with the idea of the original sin
Hmm.
as suffering as, something that humans have brought onto themselves because of their actions and that they sort of deserve it, and that we are all inherently sinful, not quite fully evil, but then we all have a propensity to do evil because of the fall, and that something is wrong with us because of what our ancestors did,
Mm.
you know. So in some sense, just before I go on, like, what do you think of this idea of original sin? Like, does it jive with you, or?
Um, honestly, I've had this conversation a lot about like original sin and how that
Mm,
continues to either carry on through generations, even after those ancestors are gone, or does it like is it something that just lived and died with those beings? To me, I feel like uh, to some extent, as a Christian, original sin was kind of forgiven in some ways because of Jesus Christ. Um, and from there we can live into this new life through that. But in terms of like just original sin as a root of suffering in some ways, um I definitely can see that, because like that particular text talked about like what would happen for the generations of women to come forward, and how foolish this one action can be, and how that would carry on throughout all of mankind and so forth. So
mm.
yeah, I see kind of both sides of the coin.
Yeah, because like through my research, like a lot of I think Christians have said that like the original sin is why we have things like disability and sickness and whatnot. If not, the world will be a perfect place, of happiness and paradise. That is highly debatable, but
Yeah,
still, you know,
that's just the Christian perspective. That's all that
yeah,
is, like one of many. So I
hmm
mean, yeah, I hear it.
yeah. But it's very interesting to see those contrasting narratives. I think in Buddhism as something being inherent to life, and then Christianity is something that's more, the blame is shifted more towards humanity. It's like life is like this because of us. Um, okay, so from that, I do want to shift into the more sociological, political side of human ideals. And I don't know if you've been watching the news lately, but right now, things people are very divided in terms of the way, let's say, like President Trump is dealing with this coronavirus. Um, that has just accentuated the divides between the left and the right, and um, what in human ideals, what we emphasize a lot is the way the left and the right approach problems differently. In terms of, this is just like a funny meme I saw in terms of uh, you know left leaning people in this country. They believe the narrative of like the oppressor oppressed narrative, and in many ways, that really does exist in terms of institutional oppression, racism, and whatnot. But as to the severity of it and how to address it, whether people should default to group solidarity and identity, and resisting the oppressor, or or on the conservative side, which is the conservative approach is to forego group identity and focus solely on the individual. Like there's this author, I don't know if you've heard, Ayn Rand, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She came up with this theory of objectivism, which is basically, I could be getting this completely wrong. This is just like secondhand knowledge, but from what I know, it's basically people are determined solely as an individual, forgoing identity altogether just by their actions and nothing else. It's
Hmm.
a, like, hence in the name, like it's a very objective uh cold, calculated, view of the world. It's very mathematical, if you want to put it that way. But also in terms of the conservative vision, another thing is they do have an oppressor oppress narrative only in terms of the government. This is a very libertarian ethos. I don't know if you can see here, but then the meme says, just to be clear, none of this counts if the nation advances technologically. I believe this refers to the situation of the coronavirus here as well, in terms of advancement, and then like, freedom of expression and whatnot, and a lot of conservatives in this time, they see the government as encroaching their freedoms by, enforcing mandatory stay-at-home laws, and even earlier before this coronavirus, the Second Amendment, they believe that the left is taking their second gun rights away and whatnot. So, it's basically a caricature of the fact, what they believe liberals to ideologically hold on to, as if we progress technologically, then these constitutional rights, there's like exceptions to them, whereas the conservative ethos is the Constitution is the bread and butter of this country. Without it, our so-called progress means nothing. And so, as we can see, there is this major dichotomy here in terms of the left and the right. And we really, even till this day and age, we really haven't gone around to how to address this. And so this is where spirituality comes in. And in these next few slides, I want to talk about the idea of love. And in terms of the motto being love in the midst of, what was it? Love to redeem the darkness. Yeah, that's it. So love to redeem the darkness. The redeem part I will explain later. But in terms of society, we're both men here, and we have experienced to greater and lesser degrees what it is like to in the dating scene and whatnot. And obviously, there are some people are, we can say, better off than others in terms of, and then we have to compensate for, let's say, looks or confidence or whatnot. And those societal values are very deeply integrated through our media and movies and whatnot. And men and women are affected differently, and that they each have societal expectations to hold on to. I don't know if you're in your experience, just to like pose a question on a greater societal level, what are some gender norms, especially in terms of like the dating scene, that both genders, like each gender has to like fulfill,
Yeah.
on the top of your head?
Off of the top of my head, like your traditional, like your male is your hunter gatherer type person who is like the breadwinner and the person that sweats and makes sure that the home is taken care of and protected. And then the woman is your kind of your stay at home mom that produces your children, cares for the home, cares for the spouse, and those are like two off of the top.
Mm. Yeah, that's really good. So like in this image, I just wanted to contrast a more, if you want to call it, extreme version of it, version of this, stereotype. And on the right, we have, the modern conception of women are not so much like the stay-at-home mom types anymore, but then there is this idea of the career woman, and then men men also have to uphold this image of being successful financially. Physical appearances still come into it, but it's not like the caveman days where it's just like brute physique and whatnot. People have, you could say that some of it is biological. We are attracted to what we are attracted to based on our evolution, and then some of it, a lot of it, can be attributed to societal factors. But here on the left, you can see that this image of, this is actually a YouTuber, a couple on YouTube called Squirmy and Grubs, and their story is very fascinating, where one of them, they're an interabled couple. As you can see, he has like a spinal disease, and so a lot of people, mock them and saying like, oh, why is she staying with him for? It's probably just for money and whatnot. They're probably just faking it, and like, there's all of these like societal expectations, these norms that are being like uprooted. And so this kind of leads into the idea of, true love, and love for, not only between, male and female, but also love for other people as a whole, in terms of unconditional love and compassion. So as you can see, in these two images, we on the left we have the prison inmate, solitary confinement. I just used this extreme image because most prisoners aren't put into solitary confinement like this. And then over here we have the upstanding, noble, activist Mahatma Gandhi. So the next question I want to pose to you here is that, as a society, we believe that, prisoners need to be punished, and especially the US judicial system reflects this. It's not a system of rehabilitation, it's more so focused on punishment. And so would you say that, based on the way our legal system is structured, does that reflect true love? You know? And if not,
Um,
like, yeah, how would you go about fixing it, or just a small glimpse of what a better system would be like?
yeah. Addressing your first question, no, it's not true love. It's, if anything, it's just it's a form of like torture. If I feel like, in a sense, folks go in bad, but they come out worse in some ways.
Mm,
So that is not love. And then I think a solid solution that I see happening in our prison system um, is education. I think that's something that's like been offered as like a secondary option, but not a primary option. Um, and using that to help like rehabilitate folks, and seeing, the impacts of the changes they can make within the facility, but also when they leave, because um having a record is not so easy to shake off, but when you have an education, that kind of helps you get on your feet a little bit better. So yeah.
like, just going off of that, what you said was really great. The US has one of the highest rates of, I believe it's called recidivism in the world, in terms of like relapsing in their crimes and going back to prison, which is completely pointless. So, even a lot of people have gone as so far as to abolish the idea of prisons altogether, which is, in I believe they're called prison abolitionists. Basically, what they advocate for is the abolishing of all prisons, rehabilitating criminals in society itself, rather than, they might have some form of confinement. I haven't really looked much into it, but in terms of, the expressing the values of someone like Mahatma Gandhi, unconditional love, I think, you know during when he died, when I think he was assassinated, right? The reason why they call him Mahatma was because, he even surrendered his own life without retaliation, without feeling anger or animosity towards the person who did him harm, right? So in that respect, although, criminals can commit atrocious crimes like tearing families apart, I believe that a lot of prevention and, healing people from the grief caused by criminals, and the grief that criminals feel for their own actions, some criminals don't, obviously, can only come from this unconditional love and this philosophy of nonviolence, or what is called ahimsa. And now here, this is a more jarring image. Sorry if there was no trigger warnings. I hope you'll be fine by this. This is the idea of love in terms of privilege, not only in the typical discourse of like social privilege of what race or class or gender you were born into, but in terms of ability, in terms of ableism, right? Disability. This boy on the left, I think he's like 16 now. He has a condition, if I remember correctly, what is called epidermis bullosa. It's basically he was, born with, blisters all over his body, and every day of his life, he has basically gone through this excruciating process of being wrapped, unwrapped by bandages, taking a shower, and whatnot. And this is there's no cure for this disease that we know of, and it's pretty brutal. Yeah. Yeah, if you want to watch, there's a channel on YouTube called Special Books for Special Kids. Yeah, there's this guy. He basically interviews like disabled kids from around the world, shares their stories. But anyway, where I wanted to go with that is basically the inequalities that we're born into, like something like disability by birth, which affects the rest of our life. We don't get a say in that. You know, can that also affect our ability to love and have a positive view of reality and other people? If you don't, let's say you want to become a football player, but then you can't, like this, no matter what you do, you can't build some sort of like exoskeleton or whatnot. It's just like there are limits to what science can do, obviously, which is why he can't be cured. And that really goes into a lot of what the Buddha talked about. Suffering is inherent to life, and there are things that you need to give up. um in terms of, just going off the top of your head, are there cases where, in terms of medical treatments right now, or technological advances, where these advances have not been able to alleviate human problems, like just anything in terms of like not only disability, but like poverty or whatnot, just in general?
Um, yeah, absolutely. I think, especially during COVID-19, we've seen a lot of our social issues come up.
Mm.
Like, uh, one, for example, you already said it, like, systemic racism and
uh,
like, sexism when it comes to the glass ceiling for women, and those are like the two that came to mind, and yeah.
mm. But would you say that, like, just to raise a counterpoint to that, would you say that those are amendable in the near future?
Um, in a perfect world, yes.
Mm.
But in the near future, I don't see it being amendable. I see forward movement, just not quite as much as I'd like.
Mm. I see. Because I think, like, with going off the idea of the wage gap and whatnot, the wage ceiling, there's a lot of companies that are trying to make, go to march towards like more equal pay for women and men. And some people even disagree on, like, between liberals and conservatives on the existence of the unequal wage itself. But with that said, like on a nationwide level, yes, it will take many, many, many years before
Yeah.
this is amended. And then there is also this idea of, even if these kinds of problems can be fixed, like let's say for this boy, eventually in like what, 50 years, they find a cure because we're so technologically advanced. But then by that time, this boy maybe has probably died or whatever, if we're unfortunate. So it's this nature of, like, determinism, and the nature of reality being like some flaws, if you want to call it, based on our so-called egoic personal perspective, things that cannot be reversed. And a big part of human ideals is how we deal with these so-called bitter truths of life.
Mm.
Yeah. So I want to lead into this uh, a broad overview of today's political issues and how this ties into the themes that we talked about before. So right now with COVID-19, President Trump is trying to um, manage this. Some would say the best to his ability, and others, not at all, doing a terrible job of this. But obviously, like, even before, when he was running for president, there were many people on the left that said that had slogans like "a vote for Trump is a vote for hate" or whatnot. And so, presidency is one presidency and the way to run a country is uh, one major issue that we're going to focus on in human ideals. But I think in order to build that foundation, there are many, many other subsidiary issues in terms of identity or economics or whatnot that need to be sorted out. And then so here, this is just an example of the dichotomy between feminism on the left and then the men's rights movement on the right. I don't know how familiar are you with in terms of like this gender debate?
Um,
Do you follow it?
I I'll catch it here and there. It's not something that I follow like the presidential race. But it's
Mm,
something that I'm aware of.
right. So in terms of like some general arguments that you've heard of, like maybe from both sides, the men's rights movement isn't really so prominent nowadays because feminism, it is taught in like even in I was a communication major before like last year.
Mhm.
And so we learned a lot about feminism, and even in my NGO class right now, we still are. Um, just some like in terms of feminist arguments, like what are some common ones that you've heard of?
Um, like just any general
Yeah, just any. Yeah, top of your head.
um I think one feminist argument that I usually hear is that um uh like oh okay here a feminist argument I've heard is like that men are men are like the issue of it all, and in order to create like a lasting solution, it's something that needs not only to take place within women to advocate for themselves, but both men and women to do it for women, kind of thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's like a cooperation. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of something that I've seen come up.
Mm. In terms of that is a very valid argument in terms of because if we are according to their view, if we are enforcing this patriarchal structure itself, then we uh the oppressors as a class, not on a personal level, obviously, we need to work together to fix whether it's something within ourselves that we haven't come to terms with or the system, and then we need to cooperate with women in order to make this vision of equality a reality. But again, in terms of feminist arguments like this, let's say pornography is the essential sexuality of male power, of hate, of ownership, of hierarchy, of sadism, of dominance. Have you heard any feminist arguments that may perhaps trigger a sort of reaction within you? Maybe something that whether you agree with or disagree with, something that unsettles you, maybe.
um I think something that was pretty unsettling for me was like I perceive feminism to be like one general type of thing, but
Mm,
I took a class on feminism in the Middle East, feminism in Asia, feminism in in different parts of the world, and one perspective said that a white woman's feminism is not my feminism.
mm,
Uh,
yeah.
a feminism in America is not my feminism. So it's very kind of like human ideals. It's very unique to each individual. It's not like an a, applying term to every single woman in the world. And so that kind of like pushed me, not in a negative way, but in a way that it forced me to think outside the box instead of placing feminism in a category.
That's very second wave, right? In terms of like every country, people of different ethnicities promoting intersectional feminism,
Yes.
if I remember correctly. Yeah. Um. Anyway, like where I was going with that is whenever you have a a committed move towards ending oppression and then promoting equality, you do have a reactionary movement of the men's rights movement, and they do get a lot of hate and whatnot. There is this documentary. If you haven't heard of it, I do recommend it. It's called The Red Pill. It's basically a self-described like former feminist, who she was a feminist and then she decided to I don't know what she was researching, but like, it had something to do with female oppression, and so, she wanted to interview the so-called enemy, right? Which is the men's rights activists, and then, she eventually came to sympathizing with them in terms of arguments like, almost 80% of all suicides are men and whatnot. In terms of uh, a very common argument from the men's side is like how they face unfair deals in terms of alimony and like divorce courts, and that is a big thing. And on both sides there are, there is a wave of resentment and animosity that, if left unchecked, that original vision of equality can turn into, uh, something more perverse. And anger, whatever, whichever way, whichever way you want to look at it, is, doesn't mix well in terms of whether, if you are promoting a system of inequality, and anger can fuel resistance, but at the same time it can also be a poison if you don't control it. If it sorts of, if it drains you subconsciously in terms of having a negative perception of, reality itself, and then, your ability to see the goodness in people, in general, in terms of giving them the benefit of the doubt, not indiscriminately, not naively, but in terms of your daily interaction. So that really um, bleeds into spiritual work and why we do spiritual work, so that the move towards equality and resistance isn't clouded by our negative feelings and our internal resentments. Those are things that we're working on. And lastly, just another issue is racism. Um, yeah, in terms of, I don't know if you follow the whole Black Lives Matter movement and whatnot, and other like race-based dialogues, but essentially there's this idea of, people say African Americans, witnessing police. Oh, what happened? Wait, all right. Do you still see the presentation?
Sorry. I can't hear you on this side yet.
Oh,
Oh, I hear you now.
okay, that is weird.
Yeah.
Do you still do you still see the presentation?
I do not.
Okay, it's weird. Cut off for some reason. Wait a minute. Oh, here you go. No?
Yes.
Wait, cool. Okay, I don't know what happened, but anyway, just moving on from that, and then like from Black Lives Matter, there's like a reactionary movement again here, um, saying that all lives matter, and then basically the Black Lives rebuttal to this is like, yeah, of course all lives matter, but then right now, because Black people specifically are being marginalized, doing something like this is just insensitive and shows a lack of awareness to the resistance that needs to happen in order for true equality to actually become a reality. And saying all lives matter is just like a platitude, for all they care.
Yeah.
And in many respects, that is correct. And at the same time, um, a lot of times, like, people who are oppressed can develop personal resentments towards the people that that they see are oppressive in their personal lives, whether it's a friend or whatnot that's being abusive, or that's better off than them. They can see that as being a personal offense. So in terms of, when they fight for equality in this movement, their personal resentments cloud their view of, their overall mission. And so spirituality, again, to reiterate, is about, making sure that we're not clouded by these perceptions or any reactionary message that tries to, devalue or denigrate our move towards equality. And then lastly, another issue is climate change. In terms of, I don't want to go I don't want to take too much time on all the issues, but in terms of just a general overview, Greta Thunberg, she is one of the most prominent figures in climate activism. This is one of her most renowned quotes. And then there is reactionary movement of not climate deniers, but what this activist Naomi Site, I think that's how you say her name, of climate realists, or what some people would say are climate deniers. And so people can also disagree on basic facts themselves. It doesn't always have to be oppression felt on an experiential level. It can be even with climate change that uh, isn't necessarily felt on a day-to-day basis. There can be disputes over facts. And so this spiritual activism movement, it's not just about purifying our, so-called negative reactions, our personal resentments, but about determining these facts that can influence issues that occur over much larger timescales. And so, this also ties into our economic systems of, whenever we select a nominee for president, like right now, I believe Joe Biden is the only Democratic candidate that's going up against Trump, and so we get into these arguments of what's better. Like when Bernie was running, he was seen as like a lot of conservatives saw him as like a pure socialist. Democrats say, oh no, he's just a democratic socialist, or a social democrat, which is like a completely different thing. And we also have misconceptions of what these terms actually mean. We just throw them around so that, to dismiss the opposition, but at the same time, we really need to know when we are shaping political discourse, like what these types of terms actually mean when we use them. So that's just a brief overview of some of the issues that we were going to cover in Human Ideals. But as for how we address them, this is where I want to get into systems frameworks. I don't know how familiar you are with in terms of addressing issues in terms of like drawing maps and diagrams in your classes.
Um, we've done it a few times in crisis management, conflict resolution, and
Mm,
a few other ones. So I'm a little bit familiar with it.
yeah. Okay, so here, in terms of I don't know if you've dealt with those issues in terms of maps, but there's one map here in spirituality. This is the consciousness scale by a teacher named Dr. David R. Hawkins. So basically, you can see that all of the emotions below 200, it's like a 1 to 1,000, 0 to 1,000 scale, right? So all the emotions below 200, he says, are not coming from a place of integrity, and that they lead to more harm than good, not only on a personal level, but on a societal level, like pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, shame, all of these things. These are symptoms of so-called low consciousness and spirituality. And there is a reaction to this in terms of more skeptical types, in terms of, oh, can we really categorize the human experience into like positive and negative emotions, and should we suppress negative emotions, or like just simply let go of them, or should we integrate them and feel them wholly, or even like use them to our benefit, like Carl Jung, I think he mentioned, like integrating the shadow and using it to our benefit, like using our tendencies for anger, pride, towards a productive way, whatever that expression may be in society. Obviously, people manipulate those traits, like nice narcissists or psychopaths, like dark triad types. There is this. So what I want to say is that in terms of addressing these social issues, on the left, there is this idea of like using, like feminists, for example, using anger towards their advantage, like to motivate their resistance. And then in spirituality, a lot of people say that this is using this kind of transmutation is not good. And so there's a debate around this framework of the first framework of like emotional purification. right? And there's these are just like a lot of varied examples of like frameworks that are out there. Obviously, they're not comprehensive, but another one, I don't know if you've seen this before, but this is from Buddhism. It's called dependent origination. This is basically how how desire is formed in the mind, and then why we suffer. So there's like an actual cycle of this. Like, if you've heard of mindfulness, this is just like the next step of mindfulness of, stopping that cycle of craving before it arises. Because when we indulge in cravings, a lot of the times it gets worse. Yeah. And then another framework here is that of personality typology in terms of addressing these issues of identity on a collective level, like race or gender. Can we strip that down into individual personality types, and then maybe that's why they have different views of how to deal with the other that they see as being their oppressors. And if we can have a mutual understanding, not only just as like a collective enemy or common enemy identity politics, if we can not dissect people, that's a bad word, but like understand people in terms of their personal tendencies and what kinds of values they cherish, and what are their the thinking mechanisms that make them productive on a daily life, and that requires getting to know people on a deeper level, actually forming friendships with them. So that kind of overrides our tendency to, oh, they're an oppressor, and they can't possibly understand what it's like to be marginalized, and so they can't help us out in any way. These frameworks kind of bypass that. And then there's also on a systemic institutional level, there's this framework called systems thinking. It's basically, there's a lot of like feedback loops and whatnot, especially in like climate change. These models are used in terms of like nature and like what is it called, like in terms of like weather cycles, like condensation, evaporation. In like science classes, you've probably seen that diagram, something like that. Like in human ideals, that the idea here is that every week, whether we meet like once or twice per week, one day would be dedicated towards inner work, and then another day would be dedicated towards using our integrating our personal insights, our spiritual insights into these kinds of frameworks. And then, mixing and matching that with some of the other frameworks I mentioned, like personality typology, to get a more nuanced view of these issues. Right, and then so lastly, we have this framework of spiral dynamics. It's called spiral dynamics. And this framework is basically about how societies evolve in terms of their collective systems. Now, currently, a lot of people say that the U.S. is at stage orange, so it is, like very capitalistic. And then this is why, people say that this explains why those on the left want to move to like stage green, which is more egalitarian, which is the idea of democratic socialism. But even with that, there are higher levels of beyond like capitalism and socialism, or even like communism, which is like, I think, like stage red down very low. But then, as society evolves, our idea of how to combat systemic inequalities changes. And this is where systems thinking comes in, especially yellow. It's called natural systems, multiple realities. And then these two colors at the top are called second tier thinking, and then everything like from green to below is like first tier thinking. Yeah. So like these people, people who develop themselves to turquoise and yellow, they can be flexible in terms of if they talk to someone who's at orange or green or whatnot, they see what they're coming from, and at the same time see what they're missing, and then convince them, from that view, take them to like a higher, a more nuanced way of thinking. So it's not only disagreeing with people, or, oh, I don't share the same values as you do. You say that, oh, I see where your values can be valid, and then now I'm offering you a way of thinking that you're missing, that you yourself can apply and we can implement together. And that's what human ideals, the second tier thinking is a huge thing in terms of the way we carry out our work. Okay, so now I've talked a lot. Okay, so now what I want to do is just to give an overview of some practices. And so in these next couple of minutes, if you have time, what I'm going to do is guide you through some meditation, some more of the esoteric aspects of meditation that we'll be teaching. So the first thing practice is called the 6 R's. It was created by a monk, Buddhist monk called Bhante Vimalaramsi. So basically what it is I showed you that, if I go back, yep, the cycle of dependent origination, right? At first it seems very abstract in terms of, because this is what the Buddha realized when he became enlightened. He literally saw this on an experiential level, right? And that's a very, 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 very advanced stage. But in terms of starting from the basics, this practice, the 6 R's, I can show you right now, will allow you to eventually see that cycle of craving. So what I want you to do right now is you can close your eyes. Okay, and then you just want to breathe in and out, just naturally and not force it, and just keep like a tempo of breathing, relaxed breathing. Okay, now as you're breathing, you don't have to open your eyes, but I just want to ask you, did you feel any distracting thoughts in particular?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
Just the sounds outside my window.
okay. And did you feel agitated in any way?
I did. I was trying to find a tempo, and the agitation caused me to rethink my tempo again and again and again.
Okay, cool. So I want you to get back into the breathing. And if you feel distracted, just let it be that way, and I'll tell you what to do. Okay. So you just want to find your tempo again, just breathing, just relaxing. You don't want to force it. Okay. So okay, this might be a little hard to do, but raise your thumb if you feel distracted. Okay, cool. So that first step right there, you doing that is a step called recognize. So that's the first R, called recognize. And then now what I want you to do is release that thought. Release that thought. And so what do you feel when you've released it?
I immediately felt like my breathing was able to calm down and
Okay.
find an easier tempo to breathe in.
All right, cool. Okay, so I want you to keep breathing again, and then when you get distracted, just another thumbs up. Okay, so I want you to do that again. So recognize it first, release it. Okay. And then now what I want you to do is, do you feel any sense of tension and tightness in your body?
Yes.
Okay. So now what I want you to do is that it's called the third step, which is relax. So relax that tension.
Okay.
Okay. Now what do you feel?
Um, I feel a lot calmer. I feel slow. Slow is the word that comes up.
Slow in terms of breathing?
Uh, Breathing and body.
Okay. That'd be good. But you do feel a sense of relief, right? If you want to call it that. Okay. So now what I want you to do is feeling that sense of relaxation or slowness or whatever you want to call it, bring up something wholesome in your mind, like a happy thought. Okay. Okay, now open your eyes. Okay, so going through this process, the 6 R's, recognize, release, relax, re-smile, return, and then the last one is just repeat. What you basically do is that if there's another distraction that pops up in your mind, you just repeat the 6 R's. So like you cycle through them, basically. So going back to that framework of, oh yeah, the map of consciousness, here you have these like lower emotions and whatnot. You know, a lot of it, spirituality isn't just about like thinking good thoughts. There is a cycle of when craving arises, knowing that, you know, what the Buddha taught, one concept, the word is called anatta, which basically means, a lot of people translate it as not self. Basically is like, you're not in control of those things, so you don't take it personally, basically. Right? Because there's like a condition for you to be craving, and as long as that condition isn't gone, which is here, it's called ignorance, ignorance and formations, which leads to craving. That's why you're still suffering from these negative emotions. So basically what you do, if you want to go through it again right now, just really quickly.
Yeah.
Just, okay, so now just try these 6 R's on your own. Recognize, release, relax, re-smile, return, and repeat. Okay, you got it? All right.
Yeah.
I was just trying a little bit. And so obviously you can use that to surrender all of your negative emotions, but here I won't go into this next practice too much because it does take a lot of time. This is basically what a lot of Buddhist monks use, the really hardcore ones. It's contemplation of death and the decaying corpse, or like it's called asubha meditation. The word asubha just means like unpleasantness or foulness, or meditation on anything that's foul, whether that's like a rotting corpse or, you know, chewed food or whatnot. Like it's very like disgusting things, not to elicit like, you know, that feeling of disgust, but to be disenchanted, to not have any love or craving or aversion towards these sensory experiences, sensory attachments. So, you know, whether that's like physical beauty and other attachments like that, this kind of meditation can be used to unwire them. And if you combine that with the 6 R's, obviously it's even more productive. But this one in particular has it relies a lot more on visualization, so it can get very strenuous. And then if you're starting out, I don't really recommend it, because even with this, I still don't have a lot of experience with it, so it takes a lot of time. But this next one is pretty easy to do. It's called self-inquiry. So basically, it revolves around asking yourself a number of questions related to your sense of self. So right now, I want you to close your eyes. Yeah. So as you're closing your eyes, I want you to tell me, where do you feel your sense of self in your body?
Like a specific location.
Yeah, like a location.
I feel it in my head.
Your head. And okay, can you be just, let's take it another level. Can you be a little bit more precise? Where in the head?
Um, I feel it specifically like in the back region
Mm,
of like my head. I can't recollect what part of the brain it is, but that's where I feel it the most.
interesting. Huh. Is it like inside your head or like behind, like as in like behind your actual head?
I feel like it. I feel it inside. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now open your eyes. Okay, now check out this diagram on the left. This is basically, he's a really, really advanced teacher. What he did is he discovered he's pretty much an innovator in this spiritual um, in the field of spiritual teachers. He does have like a history of abuse and whatever, but that's a separate issue. But specifically with regards to self-inquiry, what he discovered was that feeling your sense of self in terms of these portals, specifically located portals in the body, and as we surrender that sense of self into a more expanded space, as you can see here, in terms of that sense of self inside your head, like where would you say that is on this diagram? I know the font is a little hard to see.
Yeah, no worries. I would say it's a borderline between conscious me and the pure me of consciousness.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, yeah, like that, what he says is that that is the beginning of cultivating sensitivity to your sense of self or subjectivity. Because in spiritual circles, a lot of people say that, oh, you have to transcend yourself and deny yourself. He says that, no, first you need to actually feel yourself, your sense of subjectivity, in order to surrender it. So, this level of nuance is something that I do want to introduce with human ideals, but with this teacher in particular. But obviously, this sense of self can become an attachment, which is what I want to show you now in this next step. So close your eyes again. Okay, so the first step, we did ask the question of where am I? So I asked you to locate your sense of self. Where are you? And you said the head, right? And then now I want to ask you, if I ask you the question, who am I or who are you? What would you say? How would you describe yourself?
I am Tao.
Okay,
That's yeah.
your name and like characteristics.
Oh, that I am
Yeah.
Tao. I am calm, and I am um, I am listening.
Okay. So you describe it in terms of actions, and then is there anything? Okay, since you described it in terms of actions, that is a little hard to work with, but I'll try my best. So yeah, but here, as you feel your sense of self like this, like you answer this question, is there anything that sort of threatens the stability of this sense of self?
Besides, I think the two things that come to mind are the distractions when it comes to
Okay.
listen, and then also another thing that threatens the stability is how do I say is um, for lack of better words, it's hunger because my sense of
Hunger.
is
Okay.
getting to become anger in some ways.
Cool. So it seems like a lot of it is present stimuli in your present experience. How about conceptually, in terms of, let's say, there's the Tao who's experiencing right now, but there's also maybe the Tao who, what major are you?
My major is ministerial leadership.
Industrial leadership. Okay, so conceptually, um, is there anything that threatens that conceptual self, or in terms of your self image? Not in your present experience specifically, but just in general in your life.
Um, yes, absolutely. For me, the two things that come to mind for the conceptual self is is failure and the uncertainty of that happening, and then the next one is is it's like conflict or challenge or hardship that would
Mm,
challenge that conceptual self.
okay. Okay, so a question now, another question I want you to ask yourself with that, just working with that is, when is that sense of self? When does that self arise? Whether it's in your past experience or what you're anticipating. When do you think it'll arise, or when has it arisen before?
Um, this sense of self has arisen. I, I, I feel that this sense of self has arisen when about, I want to say, a year ago, when I first started this journey into um, my program and my new life here in LA. And yeah.
Okay. So now another question with that is, ask yourself, when can you let this go? Okay, now, so what answer pops to your mind when you ask
My
this?
brain was saying, yeah, you can let it
Oh,
go today. But my a definite timeline for when I can let it happen.
okay. Wait, the internet connection kind of wavered there for a moment. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, no worries. So the my brain was telling me that this was a past self, so it's already gone. So
Okay.
technically, it's not there anymore. But the the I am Tau, thought that this was something that is still a part of me, and that I still need to keep and honor it in some ways.
Okay. So you're still kind of holding on to it, right? Would that be accurate? Or
Yeah.
okay. Okay, so essentially what this practice is, like, as you do self-inquiry, eventually the frequency of these types of thoughts and attachments related to the self, specifically this network here is called the default mode network, these little nodes. This is like a study of mindfulness meditation. When they meditated, basically the activity quieted down from like diagram A to diagram B. And so basically these self-referential thoughts, eventually as you meditate, when you become fully enlightened, some people, there's a number of people that have achieved this, it quiets down to almost zero. Like the frequency of
Oh,
their
wow.
like self-related thoughts in a day is like literally their mind is like quiet, and what people say is that they become super productive and they're free of all anxiety and worry,
That's
basically.
amazing.
Yeah. So, it's a pretty simple practice, and in some ways it is better than you can do it anywhere you want. It doesn't have to be just sitting meditation. Um, Okay, so now this is just like a final practice, just to show you here. So this is more related to the breathing exercise mentioned before. So right now I want you to close your eyes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, now I want you to establish that tempo of breathing again. And so now as you breathe, I want you to feel your entire body, like the presence of your entire body, like around you. And what you want to do is, as you're breathing, you want to become one with this presence. Make it as solid as possible. Don't force it, but yeah, just make sure you're firmly rooted in it. Okay, so now without moving or opening your eyes, I just want you to tell me, what do you feel when you do this? Yeah. So what did you feel when you did that?
Um,
Anything in particular?
yeah, one thing I felt was uh, like I felt the fatigue in my body in
Okay.
certain areas. And I also felt like the lightness of certain areas, like my
Mm.
face, the top of my head, and
Okay.
my shoulders.
Did you feel
The
one with that?
things I was
Yeah.
feeling.
Okay. So you felt a lot of tightness. Did you feel one with that, the whole bodily presence? Like, as you were breathing, did you
Um,
feel that you were coinciding or syncing?
yeah, I was able to like recognize, sort of like as a part of the whole. I was able to get deeper into that. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, cool. So right now I just want you to try that again because you experience some tension, which is good. And we'll work with that. So I want you to close your eyes again. And again, as you're breathing, establish that tempo of breathing. With each breath, I want you to feel the presence of your body. And don't do it as where like you breathe in and then you feel it and then you stop and then you breathe out, you feel it and you stop. You want to make that presence continuous. You feel your whole body continuously with the breath. What really helps in this meditation is if you feel the space that your body's occupying, not just feeling like specific parts in particular. So you can imagine as though like there's like a mini force field around your body and you're just trying to feel that force field. So as you keep doing that, can you still feel your tension? Okay. Can you feel a little bit of tension?
Um, in one area, but it feels a lot number than it was before.
Okay, cool. And now just join, like coincide with your presence. That is a good sign. Again, feel, if it's hard to do, like just again, feel like a force field around your body. Just the presence of your body. Okay, now as you do that, as that field becomes more solidified, you should feel a sense of I want to call it pressure or like sort of an energetic fluctuation. Do you feel anything like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so again, feeling your presence right now. Just get rooted in it. Okay, now we talked about that tension before, that little bit of tension you felt. Let that tension go as you're in this presence. Again, if you're disconnected from the presence as you do that, you want to establish the connection again. Just breathe, feeling your whole body. And then as you become more present, if there's any resistance, let go. Okay, now you can open your eyes. Yeah. So basically, this is actually one of the more advanced practices, um, within this program. It was invented by a man named L. Ron Gardner uh, basically it did take a couple of months for me to get this right and explain understand what he was talking about. But basically, when you do this, um, as you may notice, with the other methods, there was only this concept of letting go. Of if you have an attachment, you basically surrender it, and then that's that. It won't arise again. But then what he says is that no, that's actually an incomplete understanding of what awakening entails or what freedom from suffering entails. And what he says is that there's two aspects to suffering. One is that we avoid, bad experiences in life. So that manifests in terms of releasing tension whenever we feel something we don't like. We let go of resistance. But what comes along with that is that we tend to run away or contract from these experiences like this. If we think of ourselves like as an open hand experiencing life, right? Then whenever we feel something, experience something we don't like, we do this. We contract, right? So like it's basically fear, to put it simply. And so what this practice is doing through a combination of presence and surrender is actually a good thing. Don't that's what he says, but that combining it with presence allows you to fully become one with reality and overcome this sense of fear, this habit of self-contraction, what he calls it. And so there's this analogy of Ohm's law, right? If you've taken a physics course, current equals to voltage over resistance. Basically, what he says is that if you have enough conscious presence or, coinciding with your body, and then you let go of your tension, what'll happen is there'll be a feeling of energy flowing throughout your body. Yeah. And so if you look at it from a Christian example, this is why okay, let me move this here. So if you look at it from a Christian point of view, you're familiar with the Holy Spirit, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I'm guessing. So basically what he says is that his revisionist, if you want to call it, interpretation of Christianity is this is what the practice of communion, of Holy Communion, or baptism, true baptism. This is what Jesus was really talking about in terms of sin. As you can see, view the idea of sin as like rebellion against God. In terms of like, most people say it's like, oh, not following the 10 Commandments or whatever. That's all secondary. But what he says is that his explanation is that this habit of self-contraction, avoiding reality when we don't like it, that is fundamentally sin or a separation from God, creating a separate self time and time again. So in his view, of course, the separate self is not a good thing. And so there are these differences in terms of spiritual teachings. But why I bring this up again, this is not just another esoteric practice. The point is, in human ideals, we also get into in-depth research of the origins of religious practices and what the original founders of these religions actually meant and how does that differ from the consensus point of view, or in terms of what the average American is taught about Christianity, for example, or like even evangelicals, or I don't know what sect or branch of Christianity you come from. Which branch do you come from?
So I'm a Protestant Christian. So
Protestant? Okay.
yeah.
Seems to be very common. Is that the same as like evangelicals? I don't know much about.
Evangelical is like a sub branch of that. They're just more. I mean, and you have a diversity between that, but like evangelical Christians are more like your I don't want to call them fundamentalists, but they're more like your Baptists, your a few other handful of of denominations there in there. So like Baptists are the first evangelicals I can think about. Yeah.
I see.
I lean more on the side of like the progressive. They call themselves progressive. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, I just want to take a couple of seconds here because I don't want my computer to run out of battery right now. So what I'll do is, okay, I'm gonna move this. Okay, so the lighting may not be so great here. I'll be sitting on my bed.
No worries.
Yeah, there is this open window behind me. But anyways, cool. So going back to this idea, of the Holy Spirit, and one as a huge part of human ideals will be, investigating the more esoteric or so-called hidden teachings in the behind in the original founders of these religions, right? And how does that differ from the consensus? And by challenging more orthodox viewpoints, can we also influence, deeper societal norms,
Mm.
right? Okay, so that's basically more or less in terms of practices, the issues and whatnot, the frameworks. I've covered all of that. So basically, this part is pretty short, and so this is just a concise summary of what the message of human ideals is going to be. So basically, I'm a huge fan of like superheroes and whatnot. So human ideals takes a lot of inspiration from that hero's journey, right? So, okay, just position it here. So here, on the left, these are just some great quotes I love from Batman. People need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy, and I can't do that as Bruce Wayne. So in terms of dramatic examples, I think with human ideals, it's going beyond the traditional norm of political activism and the common enemy identity politics, and that traditional approach and enlightenment. Although enlightenment is mainly focused on self-transcendence, so in some ways it is ironic because you're not trying to glorify the self through this activism. Although Bruce Wayne here, obviously, in a way he did by like becoming the Batman and whatnot. But with enlightenment, it does create a vision it does inspire people in terms of this, how do you want to call it? This otherworldly narrative, that this narrative of a way of being, or people that represent a way of living that is beyond the partisan traps that we fall into in dealing with these kinds of social issues, right? Which is why, in the show Gotham, if you watch it, there's a great quote by the young Bruce Wayne. He goes up, yeah, he says, to criminals, like, I wish you were a monster, but you're just a man. I won't spoil where he actually says this because it's a really big plot point. But this idea, this is an ethos against, like, common enemy identity politics of becoming more than the political ideologies that you sympathize with, going above and beyond that, having that transcendent so-called second tier perspective, if we're going to use spiral dynamics language. This is what it means to become a symbol in terms of heroism as flesh and blood, as a person. And this is why, in terms of like the judicial system, if you remember, we talked about this idea of true love and the way we treat even evil people, right? So as we do this, a big point I want to hit home is that a lot of people, as we go out into the public, we shape public discourse, a lot of people are going to disagree with us. And some people may, paint us as having an adverse effect on American society and politics. And, even though we're college students, we're not exempt from that judgment. So, as flesh and blood, as people, as individual people, we can be criticized, and, we could potentially like bring on a permanently negative perception if we do something terribly wrong, which obviously we do have to refrain from, but it could happen. We could screw up really bad, but the idea of human ideals itself, even if we fail, this idea of, let's say, universal love or redemption, that never dies. So in that sense, that is the type of person we are trying to become, and then banding together as these kinds of people in this group. Right, this is just a quote by about from Wonder Woman, about unconditional love, and at the same time, even if we extend this love to people, that the people we're trying to shape, they have to take it upon themselves to make that choice. And with the tying back into the idea of universal redemption, even if they fail, even if they don't agree with us, or even if they resent our message of love, or some people do resent that because of their pain and past trauma, we're always in open arms, of course, with discernment. We do have personal boundaries that we won't cross, not only for ourselves, but for the sake of other people, not bringing other people harm. This is why, like, again, the idea of prisons exists, because of confinement, which is, in most cases necessary. But again, we have this idea of human ideals being open arms, that eventually everyone will be redeemed. Like, like in the Bible, I think it says like all tears will be wiped away, like in terms of God's
Mhm.
plan, yada yada yada. But that's a long ways off. But again, this is each and everything action we take is a starting point towards that. And I was just really inspired by some of the movements, people that have taken inspiration from this, like the Guardian Angels. They used to do a lot of subway patrolling in New York. I think back in the I forgot. I think it was the 70s or something, if I remember correctly. The 1970s, they started. Their founder, they dress up in these like red uniforms, and they are like teenagers in the group, but then they're mostly like middle-aged men and women. They patrol the subways, protection against crime, and also real life superheroes. They take it this like the real world version of Kick-Ass, basically, but then they take precautions, and then they're a little bit more extravagant.
Right.
So symbolism, what I'm saying is that it can take various forms, from more milder forms like the Guardian Angels to real life superheroes. And then for the latter, a lot of people love what they do, but at the same time, some people, more traditional people, do mock them, say like, oh, these guys are a joke, you're not even doing anything,
Mm.
or even worse, sorry, there's this idea of you're just doing it to gain attention,
Mm.
like you have some sort of ulterior motive. So what I'm saying is that with human ideals, whatever path we choose to take, maybe we do like a bit of both or whatever. Maybe we do something extravagant like the RLSH, or something mild like the Guardian Angels. Either case, we can't avoid criticism, right? But at the same time, we can use that artistic expression, if you will, to convey these principles. And I basically summarize them into four, which is you heal division and mutual animosity within these groups, identity groups, but with discernment. And discernment is boundary setting for yourself and other people, confinement when necessary, and then love, extending love when necessary. And that's something this discernment is something we gain through practice. Amidst the inequalities and hardships of life is whether we're born into inequality like disability,
Mhm.
impermanence, systemic oppression, like marginalization, etc., etc. Despite, in the face of these harsh truths, we can still stand as inspirational figures. And there's this idea of, because of universal redemption, we inspire both good people, uh, ordinary, so-called good people in society, upstanding regular citizens, and wrongdoers, the people who have done wrong things, like even egregious criminal acts like rape or murder or whatnot. We are inspiration for both. It is not a one or another. It is not a matter of uh, rewarding do-gooders and then condemning evildoers. It's not that. It's uniting both of them in terms of inspiration, and that may be a controversial message. And then through that, another big point is the transmutation of worldly goals. This is more of a finer point in terms of it takes a Buddhist inspiration, because the Buddha, his philosophy was that you need to renounce the worldly life, your family and whatnot, and you can't engage. You can't engage in worldly affairs like financial matters or politics. But with human ideals, hopefully through these higher values, we can transform the way we use education, entertainment, family, government, the economy, etc., etc. And then we do all of this through a superhero sort of themed, very loosely symbolic activism. When we do outreach, whatever form that takes, maybe on campus or even outside of campus, if we gain enough resources for that. And then as we do that, what my plan is to maybe like set up like booths or like a Q&A session, and then we influence public discourse like that. And then maybe we gain media attention down the line if we do that persistently enough, and then we reach out to actual organizations or NGOs, and then we do that maybe through some sort of like uniform, whatever that is. It's not like, like I'm not saying we dress up in like costumes or whatnot, but in terms of having a symbolic, even the way we dress can convey a message, maybe something on our shirt, like a lot of activists, that's why they wear the shirts with like hashtag black lives matter, whatnot. We can convey a message even in the way we stand, the way we talk. So there's a lot of subsidiary skills that come with that, like public speaking and whatnot, and conflict resolution, but also artistic expression, maybe through, maybe not graffiti, because we don't want to vandalize public spaces, but any form of artistic expression like that. It has to be symbolic, and people are inspired by what we do, of course, by our actions and who we are. We lead by example, and this is how this theme comes full circle in the motto, love to redeem the darkness. It is, we must all love so that even the darkness turns into something that we can be inspired by. So like, as the Bible says, all tears are eventually wiped away, right? Everyone is redeemed. Everyone is saved. So yeah, that is basically it. I hope you enjoyed it. Today I was working on this. I am really tired as well, but in terms of, if people do have any questions, or if you have any questions, again, always there is what I've loosely termed the curriculum, but it's like, I believe it's like a 12-week program where each day we go through specific themes and we work on that. I'm thinking of dividing into either 1 or 2 days, maybe, because with one day, and what I want to do with because if we divide it into 2 days, like what I want to do is for the first day, like we work on meditation and inner work, and some of the more personal experiences, like how does this relate to like emotional difficulties we're having. And the second one is about using those inner insights towards like more systemic, larger issues, and that's where we can like come together. With this pandemic, it's a little hard to do, but like when we come together in person, we could like grab whiteboards and like brainstorm, and like you've probably seen like climate activist groups, like youth activists. That's exactly what they do. They come together. It's like a drawing board,
Yeah.
So we're tackling these issues from both sides, inner work and outer work, and through this process, we're becoming more vulnerable to each other. We become more trusting in one another, and then we just need to make sure that we don't violate this trust. And then even if we do have, like we do come into conflict, maybe we disagree with one another within this group, the idea of universal redemption even applies to us as well, whatever flaws we have. And so we're doing this, as much as this movement is for other people as it is for ourselves and our own purification and growing into our highest potential, our highest capacity to love. And this is essentially what Human Ideals is about.
Yeah. Awesome.
And this is pretty much it. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for your.
Any last questions that you have?
I think at the moment I don't have any last lingering questions. I I will look at your resources again that you've given us if anything comes up, or email you and have that be that. But overall, amazing job. This is great to see this here on the USC campus.
Yeah. Just another thing as well. This is just a question to you in terms of starting this group, like the logistics of it.
Yeah.
I believe we need like 10 people.
I think so, yeah.
10 people, okay. Because what I'm planning to do is like I don't want to isolate this just to USC. Like this is also a public thing.
Okay.
I'll eventually, because if you don't mind, like I want to upload this to YouTube
Okay. Yeah,
as
not a
well.
problem. Yeah.
Because eventually I may run through this presentation a number of times for like outsiders as well, people who aren't from USC, just like regular people,
Yeah.
maybe on Facebook or whatever. But maybe they could watch this video, and then yeah, they'll maybe have some questions or maybe like have their own ideas. So what I want to say is that for anyone else that is watching this, replaying this right now, if you have any personal questions or things, any new concepts that you want to add to this vision, please feel free. You can reach out to us at the official Facebook page, which Talau will link through the Interfaith newsletter, or we'll have on our Facebook page. It's just facebook.com/humanideals, all lowercase. So again, I repeat, the Facebook page is facebook.com/humanideals. You can contact us there through Messenger, or yeah, that is pretty much it. Or you can contact Talau at the Interfaith newsletter. So what's your email again?
My email is what is it? USC Interfaith Scholar at gmail.com.
Okay, so everyone heard that. USC Interfaith Scholar at gmail.com. Okay, so that's specifically for USC students. But anyways, I hope, Tella, that you enjoyed this session with us. And yeah, I hope to be carrying this out with more students in the future. But yeah, it was really nice to have this
Okay.
personal one-on-one time. I think we really got to work with your own like personal quirks and things you wanted to sort out within your own inner life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thought that I was combing through and all of my highs and lows out throughout life. So I really appreciated this time.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, that's what I want to hear. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, and I'll see you next time, whenever that is. Okay, take
Okay,
care.
Austin, have a great day.
Yep, you too.